Fire. One of the most primal and captivating elements known to humankind. Throughout history, its dance has mesmerized us. Its warmth has comforted us, and its power has both awed and terrified us. In the realm of fiction, we've seen fire wielded as a tool of destruction, a symbol of rebirth, and even a manifestation of magic itself. From the fierce firebenders of the four nations to the blazing infernos conjured by sorcerers, the manipulation of fire has long captured our imaginations. But what happens when a bunch of scallywag mercenaries accidentally digs up a cranky pile of hot rocks with IBS?
Coming out of me like lava!
So our party unlocked the Meteor fairly early in our campaign. In fact, I believe it was our third unlock, and our good mate Phil took its reins and mastered its abilities around our pretty amazing party composition: Snowflake, Coral, Trap. But Bob Jr., the Meteor, retired at only level 6. So in a way, we had already seen it in action. But much later in our campaign, we ran out of new characters to try, which we saw coming, and I was the first player to repeat a previously played class. Insert the Meteor, aka the Savas Pyroclast, a hazardous terrain manipulator with some of the hardest hitting abilities I've seen in a Haven character. So I'm Deddy. Join me for another class review, taking on this lava-supplying crusty soul.
Introducing the Meteor, 1 inch of pure meaty goodness. Throw a schlong of fire through all your enemies with igneous path. Use Swelter's supercharged attack to erupt mountains of lava, engulfing everything around you in terrorizing flames. Make even the scariest foes cower under the might of your hardened spike. Join forces with the other members of the Super Adventure Squad: Sebastian the Crab, Bumpy the Snowflake, and Marone the Trap. Usefulness not included. Collect the whole set now, each sold separately.
The Pyroclast, and I'm going to be switching between its code name and its class name randomly during the video, so apologies in advance, is a 10-card hand limit, medium health, fire and earth consuming DPS character who can switch between melee and ranged and create and destroy hazardous terrain and obstacles, which can give a range of bonuses when doing so. I reached level 8 with my Pyro and have recently retired, which means it's time for my thoughts and feelings about how it all went. As per usual, in my reviews, this is not a character guide. There are plenty of those out there already, but instead, my experience playing this class and the level up decisions that I made, the cards I took, challenges I faced, and final thoughts. So with that, does the Pyroclast live up to its avatar of fire and destruction? Is it meaty, or is it just another potato? Get it? Yeah, you like that, didn't you? Let's look at the cards. My centerpiece, Quenched Rage. Now, our mate Phil, who played the Meteor already in our campaign, didn't really use this card that I can remember, and played a more hazardous terrain style build, which our party could use to great effect, pushing and pulling and tunneling monsters to our heart's desires. I've seen that style and thought it was awesome, but wanted to take a different approach with mine, if it existed. I mean, every class should have multiple ways to build them, so I wanted to find a card that stood out as something I could potentially build around. So back during our unboxing, which you can find in the description below, Gaz and I talked about the potential of Quenched Rage, as that card looks like it could be the centerpiece to a particular playstyle, and I was determined to see if it would work. So when Quenched Rage bottom is played, it causes your next 3 attacks to receive a -1 penalty, which in the early days seems like a lot, but it's the 4th attack where this card shines, removing the penalty from that hit and causing the attack to be doubled. This means if you have other cards or bonuses that increase your attack for that fourth swing, you add them all together and then double it. This most of the time is enough to delete something off the board or put a real dent into a boss and gives you a lot of satisfaction, especially if you pull that ×2 as well. The main drawback is obviously the 3-1s, which you have to get through first. And at the start, it can be a task to use attacks to chip that token along. But cards that hit multiple targets are a great way to speed up this process. But at the beginning, it can be hard to line up some of those options because most of the multi-attack cards have certain requirements in getting them off effectively. But when that fourth attack is prepped and ready to go, it's tiger uppercut time. And when the double eventually does proc, you get 1 XP. So with that, is the top actually useful? I mean, totally, but maybe with a bit more hazard-orientated build as being a push 3 that, when Earth is consumed, doubles the hazards, the damage an enemy takes as it moves through each tile. And that can be fairly crunchy. I have used it twice when the stars kind of aligned in a rare circumstance, but this card was nearly always used for its bottom ability. Finally, it's initiative, and sometimes it's hard to see where an initiative kind of falls on the is this good or bad for me situation. And it took quite a while before I realized I would have preferred this to go later. I found in the late game the other cards I intended to combo with this on turn 1 actually went faster than this, meaning on the odd occasions where I was asked if I could maybe go slower on turn 1 due to reasons from the party, the slowest I could go was 30. But that kind of was a me problem. It was mostly around like positioning and like strengthen, for example, like needing to go later. Yeah. Cloud of Ash was the first card we discovered during our unboxing. And look, I may have prematurely binned it. Oh, speaking of which, I didn't bring it along with me until a few scenarios in when I discovered I had too many melee top attacks and sometimes struggled to do anything useful if I was out of position. I did bring Cloud of Ash once, and the obstacle removal multi-attack to move Quenched Rage along and push all came in more handy than I was anticipating. It's also easy XP and an Earth generator, and at the time we had a party member that also utilized Earth, so it was a good card to help them out as well. The card has since then kind of rotated in and out of my hand throughout the campaign, and actually quite recently I found I've been using the bottom abilities strategically to generate me an extra XP. And also, that 23 initiative worked well when I wanted to go early-ish, so yeah, Cloud of Ash is pretty good. Not yet. All right, so Cooling has a fairly crap initiative. Just joking. This card was like my oh shit button. The bottom's burst heal was always welcomed as I got my face caved in often, but the movement restriction on the new mandatory persistent cards sucked quite a bit. Basically, quite a few of the Pyro cards have a mandatory persistent ability as a cost for playing the card, and usually they're negative and can't be dismissed the traditional way like other cards for other classes. But they may be removed at the start of each of your rests, so it's something I had to keep in mind. So with that information, I was hot garbage at timing these negative persistent cards. And obviously, you'd want to use this right before a rest as to not nerf your follow-up turns, but sometimes like planning is hard. The top is useful for pure damage and more Earth generation, but my build didn't pump out hazardous terrain consistently. So I became a tad precious with my hazards and didn't want to destroy them unless it was absolutely necessary. This essentially was a XP generator on the scenarios I brought it to when I didn't need the heal. Our first big burn card, Eruption, is a pretty exciting card. Being able to pick an empty hex, create an obstacle, and all occupied hexes around it take 4 pure damage and drop a hazardous tile. It's pretty impactful. Getting value on it can be a bit hit and miss because sometimes trying to line up a good eruption can be tricky. And if you wait too long to use it or the monsters go before you, it can mess up the positioning. Now, I used this a few times and it was definitely fun at the start, but this card worked its way out of my rotation. The double element generation has a lot of uses though, and being a lost card, you do get rewarded with 2 juicy XP. The bottom is a handy little attack too, which I always saw as a token mover for Quenched Rage with some fire. Not amazing, but it had its uses. That initiative though is total bin. But the card avoids it because I think it's got a lot of uses, and even though I rarely used it, I can appreciate the hell out of it. Did good, Eruption, you did good. Alright, ooh, okay. A card with an initiative 20 and move 6. Shut up and take my money. Flowing Fire's bottom is straightforward and obvious in its uses. Move 6, take 1 damage, and at the start of the following 2 turns, take 1 damage each time. 3 HP is quite a lot to eat for this, but like I said earlier, if you time it properly, you'll only take 1 damage most times. I did not time this well, but it really allowed me to be in all the right positions as well as traverse the map sufficiently, albeit slightly ouchy. The top of Flowing Fire was one that I misread at first. I figured it was an attack 2 in a straight line from my position that when fire is consumed would create 3 hexes of hazardous terrain, but when I was planning my first use of it, when it was someone else's turn, I read it again and realized the hazardous terrain only goes on the hexes that were empty, which makes this much harder to really utilize. Like, do you go for the 3 target line with no hazard generation, but an attack 2 on each? Or do you try to aim for 1 enemy so you can maximize how much hazardous terrain comes out? Because of the bottom, I nearly always had this card in my arsenal, but I didn't always need the move, which meant I had to find inventive ways to really make use of the top. It was another handy way to move Quenched Rage along. Yeah, this was mostly taken for that initiative and movement. Yes, Schlong Time with Igneous Path, an amazing burn for making reliable, numerous tiles of hazardous terrain, and dishing out some delicious pure damage to monsters unlucky to be in its way. This was a very satisfying way to deal with high shield, low HP monsters like groups of living spirits or flame demons. It can just be a tad tricky to line up the path properly at times, but you'd sort of work it out. This was also a great card for what would sometimes become my opener in the future, and it was also a fat XP collector. Now, I remember this card from our old Meteor because of the paths he would throw out each scenario, but he also kept comboing the bottom of it with another ability of a class that I was playing at the time. So move 1, consume fire to add to the movement, and each hex you leave, you can poop out a hazardous tile. When combined with a certain +2 and jump to the party's movement, this card is pretty nuts. And I'm sure there are boots and other items you can use to extend the movement range to really ramp up its value. Such a cool bottom ability. But one I didn't focus on because after seeing what he was doing with it, with some assistance, and knowing I couldn't do the same, I got jealous and didn't bother. Yeah, I'm salty. Oh, and that initiative though. Oh, ranged attack. Yes! Lava Bomb was such a great card for allowing me to attack when I didn't want to move, infuse the fire element, and create a hazardous terrain tile. The usefulness of this in each scenario was actually quite, high. Being able to reliably get hazardous out in the right position for follow-up abilities that utilize enemies being in hazards was invaluable. The move 4 was also much appreciated when the old Flowing Fire was on cooldown. And the initiative was amazingly shit, but, drawbacks. Gee, at this rate, you are going to starve. Well, maybe I spoke too soon. Liquid Stone, a straightforward attack with a reliable push. The bottom, move 3 with a push 1, eat earth 2, push another 2. Obviously, this card works well with a hazardous terrain build, which I wasn't working towards. So when it came to filling that 10 card limit, this never came with me. I'm not saying it's useless, and I understand it has its uses, but for me, personally, Liquid Stone is the first and possibly only card to enter the bin. Finally, we can talk about some Quenched Rage double triggers, starting with Melted Armor. This attack is phenomenal. And look, it helps that Phil enchanted the top with a +1 just before he retired. So that was a lovely surprise. It hits hard for a level 1, and if the target is on a hazard, includes a PS3. I took this nearly all the time. The only issue I would run into sometimes was getting the target onto the hazardous terrain before using this, but usually I would try to plan that a turn or 2 ahead. The bottom sort of acts as a reverse Quenched Rage without the payoff. It's That's what my ex used to call me. It adds +1 to attacks that you do. And you receive. Wait, what? Risky. The bottom is situational, and early on I didn't really use it, but at higher levels I definitely did. The initiative is bin though. Another juicy attack to potentially double is Under Pressure, which is just a regular attack 3, but you can add +2 to that if the monster is adjacent to at least 2 hexes containing walls, obstacles, or objectives, making this an attack 5, which can turn into an attack 10. This is obviously one of the better ways to make use of the double from Quenched Rage in the early days, but I did find on certain scenarios with larger, more open rooms that getting the bonus off can be tricky. But if you plan around it in advance and have some of your obstacle creation cards like Eruption and Cooling, you may have an easier time. The Under Pressure bottom gives us our first loot 1 bottom card. Let's see if it's a garbage bonus. All adjacent enemies take 1 damage and infuse earth. Not bad. Although to be honest, I'm not sure if I've ever used the bottom more than once in a whole campaign. So Under Pressure is a great card with a solid initiative. So with the base 10 out of the way, let's get Exy. Oh, okay. Force of the Earth, a card I never took. Yet I saw our OG Meteor use this a few times for that healing bonus and forced movement. This is your first pull card, which obviously goes hand in hand with forcing monsters to eat lava. The attack 1 itself is rather crap, but you get to apply a model and it's expected you'll be pulling whatever you're attacking through hazards and or traps. There's also many situations where being able to destroy obstacles can impact the tempo of certain scenarios. The healing bonus is pretty cool, especially with regen and mini heals, long resting, so overall this card can be fairly decent, and finally, that initiative is really good, and probably another reason it hurts a little bit to do this. Metamorphic Rock gives us our first tanking option with a permanent shield 1, retaliate 1, which does potentially open the eyes to another playstyle involving being a tanky frontliner. When I first saw it, it made me think there's a chance there's more tanking options further down the track, but I wasn't holding my breath. When I saw the bottom of this card, I was like, we drifting again? Then I realized moving a token forward for the Meteor is actually a good thing. You want to move those pesky negative mandatory tokens over. And then I realized I could use it to get to the double damage faster and a move 3. And then I never used it, nor felt the need to ever bring it. Okay, Wildfire I actually found really interesting, as it's a persistent that lets you spread poison and wound on your next 3 attacks whilst also generating fire each time. I'm sure that there's a build or a playstyle where this is fundamental, and it looks interesting on paper. I just wasn't interested in it or trying to make it a thing, especially after coming over from Shackles. The bottom with its move 4, wound 2, and then wound yourself didn't really fill me with joy or excitement, but I'd be open to hearing from others why this card made the cut. So with our baseline cards out of the way, I can start talking about card choices through my levels and why I didn't choose Reprisal. Cheeky little throwback if you remember way back. With our first level up options, we are presented with Searing Smoke and Deep Fury. 2 cards that give us some very interesting choices. Searing Smoke is an AoE ability used in melee to hit everything for 2. And if you consume fire, you can increase that attack by 1. And with earth, you can add muddle. It's actually pretty decent. And I can see some interesting things with Quenched Rage and this attack being pretty good as a combo, at least in the early days. Its move forward jump and model is also pretty damn good. As a while back I mentioned in my Meteor Diary video that I was really struggling with movement due to not having a jump in my deck. This was the jump we were looking for. Now if we jump back to my unboxing discussion with Gaz, Deep Fury looked like a no-brainer. It's a decent top attack that has a fairly tricky conditional bonus requiring that you are in hazardous terrain when using it to get a little extra damage and some much needed healing. But it was the bottom that really got me going. Heal 3, the next attack against a target in hazardous terrain takes double damage. As we joked a lot in that video and in our campaign, it's the famous double-double. There was a point where Gaz would ask, oh my god, are you going to do the double-double? No, Gaz, it's not on hazardous terrain. Being able to double-double a hit is the absolute dream. But in reality, you get to delete a monster who was most likely going to get deleted anyway from the regular Quenched Rage double. This means this card, from a value point of view over a broad spectrum, is only worth it really against high health monsters, like bosses. And that's if the boss doesn't come with special rules around HP phasing. So ultimately, despite choosing Deep Fury, I can safely say the amount of uses I got out of it, I could count on one hand. Whenever I was attacking something, I'd prioritize Melted Armor or Under Pressure over using Deep Fury. And whilst I did get a huge hit off with the bottom once, it really wasn't worth investing a whole levels card for it. And if I was to try Meteor all over again with a similar idea, I would have taken Searing Smoke. Hardened Spike and Living Magma were the last cards we looked at in the unboxing, and I kind of auto-locked in Hardened Spike to go with my Deep Fury. Obviously, you see numbers and potential and just say, well, this is clearly better and the way to go. Hardened Spike onto a target in Hazardous inflicts 6 damage on average, became the highest single target attack in my arsenal, and thus it felt like an auto pick with a small negative from the HP loss, like the bottom of Flowing Fire. Even without the hazard, it's still an attack 5. The bottom giving a move and damage boost, which is tripled when you eat Earth, was such a fun way to burst something down. When combined with a decent top, the fusion made for delicious double quenchies. And I managed to get this off quite a bit for some super juicy damage. Like with Flowing Fire, that consistent health loss from the persistent really becomes noticeable, especially when you can't get rid of it due to, I don't know, choosing to blow it when the perfect conditions line up at the start of a new rest cycle. And I often found myself chewing through my HP from using both of these mandatory persistent abilities in the same round. Look, Bloodlust is the thing. The last final issue I noticed with trying to get the bottom off with a worthy top was that I mostly used Under Pressure and Melted Armor, and they kind of both go late, which meant that there were many situations when a creature might move out of the hazardous terrain, which kind of messed up what I was trying to do with this combo. Now, the alternative, Living Magma, which procs a mini pierce wound attack occurring from a hazardous hex on multiple adjacent targets. This could have worked for me, setting up faster quenched rages whilst keeping wounds on targets and generating fire each round. But this view is only something I've worked out now when looking back at cards I didn't take, so it wasn't even close to being on my radar at the time. The bottom's ability to move a hazard around the board to set up for a variety of future options is in a similar situation as the top, in that it's only something I'm appreciating now, as from a first glance, it looked quite linear with its application. But I'm enjoying looking back at these cards that I didn't select, and it will forever be living in my distant memory of what if. I think there's good arguments for me to have either card, but I was satisfied with my selection of Hardened Spike, unlike Deep Fury, even though one of these cards was consistently trying to kill me. Now, my brain has this uncanny ability at times to read an ability on a card in my head differently to, well, what's on the actual card. And this was exactly the case with the level 4 card, Heatwave. So I picked the card because of the bottom, which I read as Initiative 8, hello, Move 2, and Consume Fire to create a 1 hex of hazardous terrain in an adjacent empty hex, and create Earth. So you can imagine my surprise when the card gets patched the first scenario I go to play it, and now it's an obstacle instead of a hazard. I thought, gee, a Move 2, create a hazard. That's going to be great with Melted Armor and Hardened Spike. And when I first went to play it, I read it out loud for some reason, and I thought something was wrong. Obstacle. Obstacle. I don't want that. After a rest cycle, I see my hand again. The same thing happened. I auto-decided it was going to create a hazard and went to play it. It didn't change. It was still an obstacle. So that's when I decided to retcon my decision for the very first time because it didn't do what I thought it was doing. The push top with some pure damage is pretty different and definitely would have its uses, but not for a smashy build. So we scooped up the alternative. Hand of Flame does make a hazardous tile. Yay! It also generates me a nice easy XP, some fire, and throws in a bonus model. The attack 2 bottom, looking very similar to Eruptions, is a handy bonus attack, provided I didn't need to move, and it helped move our little Quenched Rage token along nicely. And sprinkled a wound in there as well. If only the initiative competed with heat waves, but alas. Level 5, the halfway point. Well, just over the half, you know what I mean. This is the level we get some class-defining cards. So do these cards live up to the reputation that I just gave them? So in the red corner, we have the hazard-generating Rain of Fire with its crazy ability to create 2 1-hex tiles of hazardous terrain within range 3, pumping a fair amount of pure damage depending on its positioning, whilst also remaining agile with its move 5 jump. How can anyone compete with that? And in the other red corner, we have the multi-targeting ranged attack Magma Orbs, which can target up to 3 enemies provided it's fed with fire and earth, and alternatively, can pull an enemy into a freshly created lava tile. This was an interesting decision. On one hand, I can have consistent hazardous generation, which can be sometimes tricky for my current build to get off. Setting up some awesome plays the turn after when everything is all hot and hurty. Rain of Fire also had the more flexible bottom, the ability to jump, which I was sorely missing at the time, as I was rocking a pair of very solid boots of speed. I know. But Magma Orbs. I knew my only real ranged card was Lava Bomb, which I was using at the start because I normally prepped Quenched Rage, which meant I wasn't moving, and this gave me element flexibility for turn 2 with both fire and earth up. And now I'm gifted another ranged attack that gets even better if both of those elements are up. This was such a double enabler, because if I could get both elements up at the start, I could literally use Magma Orbs to not only attack and start plowing through my AMD, but I'd also be chipping away at my Quenched Rage, meaning I could make sure it was ready for the follow-up turn, thus speeding the Quenched Rage rotation. Or, as soon as I realized, I could blow the third orb on the double attack. This was the moment I went and grabbed item 101, aka the Greater Power Potion, to pump this up even further. And I also started to see another synergy with the bottom of Melted Armor to counter the DPS loss from the first 3 charges of Quenched Rage. So the order of when and how I wanted to do this became really, really flexible. I 100% picked Magma Orbs here. And I was excited to see if it was going to work like it was already working in my head. Always a gamble.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
So did it? Yes. Yes, it did. And the table got very familiar with rounds where I would quietly stare at them, look them in the eyes, and whisper, "I'm blowing my load." Rain of Fire also looked like a brilliant card with a decent initiative, but it didn't look like it would help with the double thing. So maybe next time. Well, I'll be damned. There's a tanking card right here. Obsidian Shield looked pretty cool when I first saw it, but too bad we just weren't into each other. This card effectively mitigates 4 damage and throws back 5 pure and a Haz token, which is a pretty good return. Look, I haven't tried this, so I'm more theory crafting in my head, which is always a risk. But yeah, it looks like a decent option if you want a few defensive maneuvers, but I did not. The bottom even helps to negate the next source of damage, which could be pretty clutch at the right moment. It's also another reliable way to break a rock, which I actually hadn't considered. Either way, Return to the Source is another ranged attack that generates fire and pulls 3. This got me fired up in excitement until I saw the mandatory persistent, which, look, it's not that bad. And again, it can be timed efficiently with rests. But there were a couple of instances where someone would push something through a Haz, and I'd be the party pooper to explain it doesn't take the damage, which sometimes led to confusion. Look, it was worth it to get the fire up, especially before a Magma Orb turn, and obviously to reposition things. So yeah, Return to the Source in the pantry. It's another throwback. I'm all about the throwbacks today. So these 2 cards have fairly nice attacks, with one being slightly harder to understand at first. Erupting Rage has some really nice synergies with the Rolling Push perks, provided you have multiple obstacles in the area. Oh my God, there's actually a scenario I just thought of where that would actually be busted. The first room in scenario 4. Swelter's top attack relies on good positioning of your hazardous terrain, which was something I was fairly bad at. But the bottom of each is where things get really interesting. And there's clearly a better option. Okay, maybe not better, but more flexible. Erupting Rage's bottom ability really helps with getting a lot more hazards out. 2 hazards and move 3, deal. Swelter's bottom is all about the room and the amount of monsters and actually setting up the nuke. And it would be super satisfying to get it off effectively in an incredibly swarmy scenario. You all know which card I took. Swelter. I just had to see it work. And to this day, I've only done it once. So its value may be questionable. But that scenario I used it in hit 11 standees and probably won us the scenario when it was actually looking like a wipe. So good memories. Okay, at the time of this recording, I hit level 8, but hadn't chosen my card nor played the scenario that would retire me. Cinderlance is just calling to me due to the potential 8 attack. I know I can line up both elements, and I know I'm good at taking 3 damage. It's a talent. The bottom looks really sweet. A move 2 and an attack that can hit 2 targets. This card would probably throw off my tempo, but the rage must be quenched, and I can see this card being amazing. Feed the Beast has gone the super wordy route by making me look over it several times. The damage is potentially really high, and it's also pure, which gives it a lot of points. It's the setting it all up that's most likely going to book me if I don't plan accordingly. When I first read its bottom, I was like, 2 extra damage, and I remove a hazard. What shittery is this? But 2 pure damage on top of whatever else you're doing might be valuable, especially against certain monsters. I will hold my upload of this video until I retire, and then I'll post my findings somewhere around here. So I won't be hitting level 9, but I'll still have a look at our options and take a stab at what I would choose. Okay, I just reread the top and bottom of Calamity, and I've just locked that in already. That looks like Swelter levels of fun. The top is just, can I use this with Swelter? I would absolutely love to try that. That is just stupid. So the extra setup this card gives you for the next few turns is also great from the creation of like those tiles, if you have the elements up. The bottom is a good old-fashioned mind control move 1 for every enemy in the room. I want it. Okay, Stone Armor gives an insane amount of negation provided there are obstacles nearby, either the top or the bottom. Really good for survivability. But yeah, this is a no-brainer. It would have to be Calamity. Damn that initiative 9 though. All right, let's have a little chat about perks and masteries. So with the perks, I wanted to obviously remove as many negatives as possible for more damage. I feel this is a bread and butter for perk selection with most characters, unless they don't utilize their AMD all that much. Now, the triple perker, I considered skipping, but teammates, they're all like, excuse me? I'm curious about how bad things would have happened if I skipped it. So I guess, you know, I had to get that one early, otherwise QQ everywhere, right? Okay, to be fair, I would have been standing in it as well, so I guess, you know. Everything else was more focused on the AMD. I ignored the last 2 class perks. I think they both have their place in offering various levels of usefulness, but I didn't want extra things to plan around when I was resting. If I had to choose one, I'd probably be looking at the ward one. Ward is always good for most people, wasted on others. The perk I regret picking was probably the rolling pushes. I kept drawing them over and over again, sometimes chaining them, but never really wanted to push anything further away. And the times that I was, like the rare times that I was actually trying to push it further away, I would never see them. So yeah, typical, right? I wished I had gotten the elemental infusion perks earlier though, as I did run into a couple of situations where I was needing either fire or earth and it felt bad, man. For masteries, I didn't bother again. But these don't look as bad as some of the characters I've played in the past. The first mastery around creating or destroying obstacles, hazardous terrain, actually looks fairly easy to achieve. And some scenarios make this look even more achievable depending on the overlay setup. I just didn't want to spend a scenario focusing on it, at least for the first couple we played, and then after that I simply forgot they existed. The second mastery looks a lot harder, especially with needing to set things up properly and also making sure something had enough health to go through like multiple hexes. The word through also makes this harder. All right, my items. So boots. I was rocking boots of speed. And then halfway through my Meteor career, we made the switch to the jump boots. I just had to do this as I kept finding myself in positions where I couldn't get into positions properly, and it was doing my head in. Studded leather was my armor, and I probably could have looked at other options after a while, but I just couldn't be bothered. These worked just fine. The spyglass was nearly always used on the double-double, so I couldn't miss. Apart from one scenario when I managed to fill my deck with curses, then things got a little scary. But yeah, this kind of makes the Quenched Rage double a reliable finisher. And then bag items. I started with Major Healing, which is amazing for helping me to not die. We had the Ember Energy Source. So ESS is just like so flexible. I believe any class can make it incredibly useful. I wonder how long I can keep rebuying it though, before someone in my party, requests it. But I feel like no one else wants it. So I guess I can have it forever. At level 5, I added a major power potion when I saw magma orbs, but it also worked for any attack ability that required blowing multiple targets up. And finally at 7, I added the lucky dice. The dice are just hilariously tense to play with, and it is just a chaotic and potentially swingy card that can make a moment and just as easily break it. So these are just a couple of personal tips from, I guess, just playing it and learning, I guess. So communicate with your team when prioritizing targets. I knew if I had a double Quenched Rage next, letting people know when you're about to blow is not only polite, but also saves you the embarrassment of double blowing on something else, like a monster on 1 HP with a wound. Watch those mandatory persistent abilities. Going in on Flowing Fire bottom and Hardened Spike top early means you'll most likely take 6 damage before you can remove them. Obviously, playing them later in your rest cycle can relieve this stress. I did not take this advice that I'm now giving. Don't sleep on obstacle removal. Sometimes it may not suit your playstyle or a build you're trying, but it can create amazing shortcuts in annoying scenarios and save your team a round or more. And if playing with Quenched Rage, don't save your double for the perfect moment. Sometimes a low HP threat that no one can deal with is a good enough target. By deciding to do this, you could ease the pressure on the team. I remember a turn I had a double ready, but there was a dangerous threat on 3 health near hazardous terrain. And I used my double on Cloud of Ash, which was an attack 1, doubled it, and then drew a +0. And then it pushed it into the hazard, thus killing it. Tempo is really important for a lot of characters, but the next layer is team tempo. Don't undervalue making plays to give your party tempo. So there were a couple of things that I did struggle with over the journey, and one of the major ones was XP. So this is my 4th character in Frosthaven, and with the first 3, I had no problems spamming out high amounts of XP. Not the Meteor, at least not in the way I was playing it. A lot of the XP is linked to an element consumption, like Flowing Fire, Magma Orbs, or another type of setup, like Under Pressure, Melted Armor, Deep Fury, Hardened Spike. Trying to plan rounds around XP generation got really tricky. This isn't helped by my PQ, which was based around generating card XP, which I laughed at because of my previous 3 characters. I found myself using cards like Cooling just for the XP, or trying to line up a great igneous path to hit multiple targets just for the XP, and not necessarily for the damage or follow-up. I mean, it could be just me, and this is normal for most characters, but I just found the Meteor much harder to reliably get XP. I also had movement issues every now and then with the bottom of Lava Bomb, which did go in and out of my deck, and Flowing Fire being my staples for a while. A lot of the level up options I did not pick seemed to fill these shortcomings, but that's the game, right? Like level up choices need to have these moments where you can't work out which one is better for what you're trying to do. And like I've said in the past, I actually really love those agonizing decisions. Melee attacks for the top with your Hardened Spike and Deep Fury and Under Pressure all have similar requirements that are different. And one of the things I kept running into was that I would go to play it and realize that I had to be standing in hazardous terrain, not the target, or it doesn't matter if the target is, or the target had to be standing in it. And I would go to play that particular card only to then realize, oh, I can't meet the requirements because I confused them, right? It's like Under Pressure is the one with the walls and the obstacles, etc. After a while, you get used to it. But at the beginning, it was really hard to remember which one was which. So finally, the Meteor was a lot of fun to play. I wouldn't have minded trying a build that manipulated the battlefield and played around hazardous terrain like more. But after playing the Snowflake, I knew I needed something different. To be able to flat out delete something every rest cycle is incredibly addictive. But at the same time, it never felt broken or busted to the point where it came up in any of our post-scenario conversations. The addition of hazardous terrain as an enabler that doesn't harm your team adds a wonderful 12th dimension to a DPS character instead of attack lots, hit hard. And scanning the board for opportunities was always a fun little brain burner. So, turn off that Billy Joel song, embrace your role with Jerry Lee Lewis, and party like you're one of the tramps. And remember, when it comes to quenched rage, it's advised not to miss.